Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. I am so excited for you to listen to this conversation today because I have a very special guest, Madison Nees, who is just an incredible, magical human and practitioner. And before I introduce you to Madison, I would just like to remind you that my course with Britton LaRue for learning astrology called Astrology as Praxis will start on September 10th, 2022, and registration will be from August 26th to 28th, which is the last weekend of August in 2022. And yeah, if you feel a resonance with my voice, with how I've been talking about astrology, about what it means to be human within this podcast, I think you will really love the experience of being in Astrology as Praxis. And yeah, it seems like whenever Britton and I do a course together, we always magnetize really incredible human beings. So you may be one of them. And I want you to check out our course page, which will be in the show notes. Okay, so back to Madison. First, I want to introduce you to Madison by way of Madison's bio, which is just so heart-opening. And yeah, it's written in first person, so the my here really refers to Madison. Madison Nees is a human, counselor, artist, and guide. My practice focuses on the intersection of ecology, ritual, and somatics. I've worked in the addiction and trauma treatment industry since 2015. My own journey includes healing from substance abuse, anorexia nervosa, loss of culture, and self. When I began my journey, I didn't understand that the pull to somatics was a call of my ancestors. I was being pulled to heal all the things my mother could not and ultimately lost her life avoiding. I was being pulled to feel the things my grandmother had no language for. My body knew the language, however, and it spoke in illness, pains, aches, and rage. It also spoke the language of health grief and aloneness. During this process, I discovered gifts hidden beneath these repressed emotions. These gifts were the sensations. The gifts were the rivers of grief leading me home to myself. They were also the intuition and creativity of my lineage. I always tried to, air quotes, do something with the emotions, but my healing progressed the more I simply sat with them. Instead of trying to push them away, I wondered what would happen if I let them grow. They grew into my practice today. I just really felt that bio. So Madison is an incredible human practitioner that I've had the privilege of working with in the past few months. And during the short time that we've worked together, Madison has taught me so much and expanded my perspective. And I also feel like Madison and I have this resonance. Like the two of us seems to understand or view life through a very specific lens that I was almost like, when I met Madison, it was like, you also saw it this way, you also experienced it this way, and it felt really heart-opening and beautiful. So yeah, in this conversation, we spoke a lot about what it means to be a point of view, to embody a very specific point of view. We spoke about the connection between being an artist and our relationship with creativity, and on the other side of creativity being destruction as well as healing. Madison's definition of what art means, We also spent quite a bit of time talking in depth about Madison's upcoming 6-month journey called Catabasis, which is going to begin in mid-September 2022. And so if you feel a resonance with Madison, I really would recommend you to check out the course page for Catabasis. And yeah, I'm really excited for you to tune into this conversation. Without further ado, this is my conversation with Madison Nees. Welcome to the podcast, Madison. Thank you for being here.
I'm so glad to be here.
So you and I met through our mutual friend and teacher, Marika Clymer. And I'm just so like amazed at the different ways that people meet each other and like the different ways that we end up connecting and working with each other. It's it's wild. And I feel like I've really appreciated being in your presence, working one-on-one with you, and I am going to be in Catabasis. So that's something that I'm super excited about. And I cannot wait for this journey. But I'm going to kind of take us back a few steps back. And I like to begin my conversations with just asking the person that I'm speaking to who they feel, know, or sense themselves to be in this moment in time.
Oh, that's a big question. And also another thing that I was thinking about is, of course, I'm a human body, right? Like I'm a Homo sapien. I say it all the time. I'm an animal. I like to forget that because I have a strong brain, so that's part of it. But also, one of the things that I was thinking about actually when I was preparing to talk to you was that it, like I'm also a point of view.
Mm,
And that has a lot to do with radical aliveness, the modality that I trained for so long in, or one of them, is like getting really clear on the lens with which you are viewing the world. Because when I'm really clear on that lens, I'm much less likely to show up in a relationship or any dynamic with an agenda. And so I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, what would I say? So some of the things that inform me are that I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the 1921 race massacres happened. I went to the school in that neighborhood. That really informed me, my life, and my practice. My mother was a European heroin addict, product of independent Baptist preacher father. And my dad's Japanese. And so we were greatly informed by World War II and my grandmother migrating over here. I also, and this is an edge, it's still an edge for me to say this, I'm queer. Growing up in Oklahoma, even in, the 90s, it wasn't
yeah.
like it wasn't okay. It's still a soft spot for me, but it's true. Um, and Yeah, I think those are some of the big pieces that I'll just kind of like place in the field because I could go and talk about my identities of work, but those seem so subsidiary to like kind of what brought me onto this planet and what lands birthed me and raised me, right? So
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that framing of us not just as human beings, but as a point of view. And I feel like you already answered my next question, but I'm really curious to hear you share a little bit about how you get from growing up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with all of the different intersections that you've mentioned into the work that you end up doing now.
Yeah. So much of what I do is I connect threads constantly. I feel like us as artists, that's what we're so impeccable at, is connecting the threads that sometimes predominant culture, they don't want to connect. They don't want to see. Or maybe that it's that they don't want. That's a broad generalization, and I don't really fancy those, but maybe it's difficult to see.
Mm,
And that being said, you know, my course, this journey to the underworld, if you will, really is a reflection of my life. Growing up with a mentally ill mother, I grew up in this underworld kind of energy, very serious. And when she passed, it was as if a lot of her generational trauma, I felt it transfer to my body almost instantaneously. And she used a substance, heroin, which is a derivative of the plant poppy, which is a plant spirit that we're going to be working with in katabasis. Um, that I ended up doing the same thing. I ended up becoming an intravenous drug user in my 20s. And I knew the depths. I wasn't thriving there. I was barely surviving, but it felt comfortable to me. And so I actually my family, they're very matriarchal, my Japanese side, and my aunt was like, I I'm moving Madison out here like on a whim. Like I'm 21, right? Like it's a risk.
mm,
He moved me out here, and it was my first semblance of seeing like a family that talked to each other, and when something was wrong, they hugged one another. Like, it was my first kind of modeling of what a dynamic in a life could be. And
and out here is San Diego,
yeah, California. Yeah.
California.
And ultimately, releasing my relationship with that drug and realizing that there was a massive amount of creativity. Painting is what changed my life. My ability to move energy through paint, through song, through movement, it was so innate, and it brought me home from just basically a lifetime of feeling so fractured. And I just was 20 something, and I was like, oh, I'm going to school. I'm going to radical aliveness. I'm going to become a counselor, and had all the energy that, we tend to have in our early 20s. And I launched a mission. I launched a mission that I wanted to work with people in the depths, people who were artists, people who had grief and ache and anger,
Mm,
and be with them there. So that's what I decided to do.
yeah. Do you feel a connection between being an artist and holding space for people through that deep exploration of their own internal depths?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Like I feel like, to me, being an artist is meeting the moment, like exactly where it's at, and seeing the way that it wants to move, or seeing or be cooked, or I always say skating is an art. Whatever your art form is, we are beings that we are meant to make art, like our, even the structure of our hands. And when I'm working with someone, the way I work is really like blank slate, meeting them exactly where they're at, and kind of like this very artistic flow that I quite enjoy. I don't think I could do it if it didn't feel like art.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I feel that. What's your big three, Madison, in terms of like your birth chart?
Aries sun, Sag moon, Aquarius rising.
I love that. Yeah. How do you relate to your birth chart? Do you feel a connection there?
Absolutely, I do. I do. Um, I will say I have like a really surface knowledge of astrology. I've always resonated with being like fiery. I have a lot of energy. Um, and Aquarius just feels like home. My North Node is also in Aquarius, so it's very strong in me, I feel like. So, you know, I know and I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Um, Something I wanted to talk to you about was, as you know, my process in doing some of these conversations, which I think I've told you before, is to almost, go into all the work that you've put out there and then allow them to really infuse my space and to almost mind melt with the person that I'm going to be having a conversation with. And something that I noticed in how you're showing up, or at least maybe this was when I started to follow you and you came into my field of consciousness, is um I really feel your Aries sun, and it's almost like there was a point where you took like the solar vitamin and you decided to show up on Instagram.
I was like in March in Aries season. It was gonna happen. And around then, because I got the message in the winter because I wanted to, commodify and like talk about the things and get excited. And I kept hearing, wait, 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 wait. So March. Yeah.
How is that experience? How has that experience been like for you? Especially, this is just something that maybe is coming out of our one-on-one sessions.
Mm.
I sense from you kind of this fluency with being in a very close container with people. Like you create such a powerful container and you give so much within this closed container. And as we know, Instagram is not a closed container. So how has that experience been for you, like allowing yourself to begin projecting out there?
I'm not gonna lie, it's been difficult for me. It's been difficult. It's been beautiful. There have been some moments where I've had reflections that I don't know I would have had in other circumstances, and like meeting you, for instance, or even meeting Marika, how we know one another. Like it's been so fruitful. But in terms of my internal process, I have wounds around being seen. Growing up and with the identities that I hold inside of me in the area of the country that I grew up in, I was not encouraged to be an artist. And here I am showing up with it. And, it feels edgy, edgy.
I love that. I feel the edge too. And there's a I don't know if you noticed this, but there's such a deep generosity, I feel like, in terms of how you show up online, because there's so much wisdom that you're sharing that I almost feel like as I'm tuning into your content and everything you're putting out there, I'm like, I need to pay Madison for this.
Oh,
Yeah. So thank you.
yeah, it feels good to hear that because, when we're in a more didactic relationship or even a group, right, you get to feel the response. Whereas in social media, it really, for me at least, I feel as though it reflects some of my own internal biases, difficulties back to me rather than. So, yeah, it's been a really deep process, and I'm trying to learn to play.
Mm. I love that. I really love that idea of learning to play. I have found in my own journey of allowing myself to be seen in that way, um, there also emerges like a way of being with one's audience where if you are the kind of person who wants to have feedback, it's almost like you kind of had to train and invite the feedback from others. And then you do get more feedback. But it is really interesting because it's largely a consumeristic platform, right? Like it's a platform where people go in and they just consume.
Mm, 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 mm.
Yeah. So I want to speak about this something you wrote about how everyone is an artist, because that one really spoke to me, and I want to read you back something that you wrote, which was I believe we are all inherently artists. I believe we were born creatives, and often in life it is the creation we unlearn, not the other way around. I believe you too are an artist, even if you've never painted on a canvas or have not created traditionally ever or in a long time. These things do not take away from the human's innate creativity that is constantly functioning within us. And you also spoke about how art brings you back into yourself. And I'm curious to hear you maybe explore or riff a little bit more about that. In what ways do you feel that art or art making or just being aware of this idea of humans as being innately creative, how does that bring us back into ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Oh, my mind goes 18 ways right there. So, first of all, I kind of want to dissect this concept of art. And, like, even if somebody's listening right now, and maybe we could do it here together, it's like when we hear the word art, what images come up? What have we learned? What is our framework with which we view art? And I'll just share for me, and maybe if you want to share, Jonathan, it's like I'm imagining, because I was first a painter, right? And I have many modalities now, but is like a canvas in a gallery. What do you
Mhm.
have an image?
Yeah, the first image that came to my mind is walking through the Met Museum and seeing these masterpieces, right? Um, Something I feel is interesting to share here is a number of years ago, I went to the Van Gogh Museum in the Netherlands. And it was such a revelation for me because to see someone's whole body of work displayed and to see the complexity of the different kinds of art he was making, the different kinds of experimentation, the different format rather than just the starry, starry night was such a huge, mind blowing experience because it was like even someone that is so revered within the canon of Western art is actually experimenting and is not, Van Gogh, I don't think in his lifetime felt like he made it or that he even knew what his style was.
Yeah, yeah, right. And I'm sure his pieces are going for I don't even know what they would be going for now, but he probably couldn't get rid of some of those. I don't know his entire life story, admittedly, but you know, I I like to get really clear, at least for myself, what that image is, because I have run a predominant. Most of my 8 year of facilitating has been in trauma and addiction treatment centers, and I ran a lot of different groups, somatic and art therapeutic based sessions. So those were my primary modalities, which is kind of why I work the way I do now. And I would hear, just some person from, somewhere in the United States or whatever, and they go, I'm not an artist. I don't make art. And I would just look at them like, they've had three heads, like just to make a point, because I'm really direct. And I would be like, what are you talking about? Of course you are. Do you see your hands? Your thumbs are especially equipped to hold something in order to use a tool. A paintbrush, my friend, is a tool. Of course you're an artist.
Mm,
And the impact and the transformation, of course not all the time, right? That I would see, even if it were lines on a page squiggling their anger, play an angry song and squiggle their anger, like something would shift and move and come alive. And so that's really informed my perception of what an artist is. Art making to me is not so much the product, right? Both of us actually thought about the product when we thought about art, but
yeah.
really is the process of creating. And so for me, if I could choose another word, maybe I would say creation rather than art, but art is kind of this universal concept that we understand. But like we're constantly in creation. And I really like that perception because in a at least, in the Western world, feeling disempowered, feeling all of these different feelings, it gives me this different energetic of like, oh, I'm creating with this life. I'm in constant communion. I talk about my plants that are in my space all the time. Constant like reciprocal dance with my environment of creation. And so I think about my life a bit as art, as a bit of creation.
I love that. It makes me think of the idea that if there's creation, there's also destruction,
Mm,
and how they're part of the same cycle.
mm, mm.
And I'm curious to hear, yeah, to hear what comes up for you around that. What comes up around the idea of destruction and art making and the process of yeah, living an artful life and the role of destruction in that.
Oh, wow. Wow. You really took it there.
I did.
Oh my gosh, I really like talking to you. Okay. Let me sit with that for a second. Hmm. The role of destruction in art making. A few things come up for me. First of all is my own, right? Because I'm saying my own lens, my own framework of how I felt utterly destroyed when I realized that I was an artist. It felt as if I I mean I didn't want to live anymore. I'm familiar with that feeling, that hopeless state. And I just said, okay, I'm just going to create from this place. And I made ugly images and images that disturbed people because it was true and it was honest. And I also think about the decomposing of a body, after we die. I often say the only thing that I know in this life is that it will end. I will no longer
Mhm.
be this body will turn into whatever it will turn into. And I also think about how when my body decomposes, I hope, I don't want you to put me in a sterile box. I want to be consumed by other life. I want to nourish another life. And so to me, I think there is no creation without destruction, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it brings me to something I was thinking about when you asked what comes up in our minds when we bring up this idea of art, because there's a way in which this civilization, this society has sterilized art making and has separated it from life. I think the commercialization of art and the, you know, putting it in the museum act of interacting with art has made it the sterile thing that divorced art itself from the complexity from which it was born out of.
Mm-hmm. When you were saying that, I was looking at you, but also seeing like singing a song to the wind for no one to hear. No, in a day and age where I tend to record everything to make it something. So it's, it didn't happen if it wasn't caught. There's a lot of potency in that, and making impermanent art a stick, right? That used to be a tree. So a little bit of destruction there
Yeah.
with making symbols or shapes or something in the dirt. Like something happens to me, even when I do something that seemingly mundane.
Exactly. Exactly. And this idea of the innateness of art making and the creative process is making me also think of something that you wrote, which was that somatics are innate.
Mhm.
And that really tickled me because I'm not super familiar with the whole lineage of radical aliveness. So maybe I would love for you to speak a little bit more on that. But from my understanding, somatics is a huge part of it, right?
Mhm.
A- and I feel like we're kind of coming into this um as a collective, coming into an awareness of what it means to have somatic training or to have somatic awareness of somatic intelligence. And then it kind of almost becomes one more thing that we need to master, right? One more thing we need to conquer. I've been saying in a couple different places about how I have no interest in mastering astrology because astrology is not my servant. And in a sense, that's kind of what I'm getting at here as well with regards to what you were saying about somatics being innate, because um this aggressive like drive to gain the skills of like somatic intelligence seems a little bit off centered to me. Like something about it doesn't feel like quite the heart of what the practice is all about. So I don't know what is coming up for you around that. I'd love for you to expand this idea of the innateness of somatics.
Yeah. So first, I want to say Radical Aliveness was founded by someone named Anne Bradney, and also created in large part by another person named Nikki Angel. Anne had been in her lineage of core energetics, which they have a large school in New York, where it was this kind of very diagnostic modality, which me working in the mental health industry, everything is very diagnostic. It's individual. We're looking within the person's life for what happened to them, to cause this, rather than looking at structural, social, societal conditions that also formed this, right? And so for me, as a more, I'm a collectivist nestled in an individualist culture, like that felt very natural to me. So
Mm,
core energetics is that. And then there's bioenergetics, which is a lot about moving energy and releasing trauma, which doesn't so much resonate with my system. Like, how am I going to release trauma? How am I going to make that not a part of just my lived frame and my lens? I definitely want to learn to digest it, but I don't know that we're going to. It kind of makes me think a little bit of like purity culture, how at some point we're going to ascend to some mastery where we won't have difficulty. And I'm sorry, it is 2022. We are in major ecological crises, all of these different things. Like, we feel the shake, and it's okay to feel uncomfortable for me.
yeah.
So that's kind of the lineage and how radical aliveness was birthed, and it was this modality that people came from all over the world. It was not just Americans in this training, which really shaped me, and I value that a lot. And through that, because I felt really confused, radical aliveness is more like a spirit. It works in all of us who went through that training, very, very differently. And so I was like, oh, how am I supposed to talk about this thing? How am I supposed to talk? And my teacher pointed me to the Indigenous peoples of Australia. and how they would do these shaking practices and ritual. And that was kind of how I was already doing ritual practices because of my own ancestry is very ritualized Japanese and ancient Germanic. And, um, and so I became curious, specifically about ritual and about song and about storytelling, how these ancient stories were passed down, not even to now, before written language. And so that's kind of the framework with which I hold it personally, is that modernity has packaged this into the concept of this sellable, reelable, real making, somatic, whatever, not
Yeah.
to it's so useful. I love it. I use it with myself and so many people, but also I don't like it being inaccessible and not feeling like, oh, I can sense into this tightness in my chest. What's it saying to me? You know? So all of our ancestors at some point had practices with which I guess in modernity we would call somatics, but they were just living life to them.
Yeah. Wow. You're kind of exploding my mind a little bit here because it's making me think of this book that I've been reading. It's actually an astrology text, but it's called Cosmos and Psyche by Rick Tarnas. It's a fabulous book, but in the first few chapters, which are just some of my favorite texts ever that exist, Rick Tarnas was really talking about this divide that um, that the modern human has created in terms of how it defines itself against the primal way of looking at the world, as if the modern human is this invention or like this new invention that is an improvement, right,
Mm.
of like draft number one. And and something that you're saying makes me realize that not only as modern people have we taken away the inherent aliveness of the world around us and of the cosmos and of the plants and the animals, but we've also done that to ourselves. No longer is my heart space this animate space that has its own intelligence, but it kind of becomes this dead thing now, right? Yeah.
And we can diagnose it, and I can say that's anxiety for you or whatever, which I'm always very I don't do that with who I work with. It's more about reclaiming that. And our relationships are a ritual. I think about growing up in this massive Japanese family. We didn't always talk about our problems. We cooked together, we shared food. And in that way, would I call that somatics? No. But it was this way of dealing with conflict and being in relationship with a different way and communicating beyond language, which we do. We're constantly engaged in.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I really like this concept that you're bringing in about ritual. And I'm curious to hear more about what that word means to you, especially in light of the fact that you are calling katabasis a ritual. And so, what does that mean? What does that word mean to you? And yeah, it's interesting because I think this is very much a learning um, area for me. As someone who grew up in a Christian household, this idea of ritual was very much kind of taken away or vilified a lot. And so I think ritual was for me kind of the last frontier. You know, it there's something about that word itself that feels scary. And it's kind of ridiculous because I realized that me winding down before I go to bed is a ritual, right? Me taking showers twice a day, that's a ritual. But something about like how ritual also has like a ceremonial aspect to it can bring up, I think, a lot of fear both within myself and in a lot of other people. Hmm.
Yeah. And some might disagree, and it may be called something else. But for me, growing up, in two worlds, if you will, the Christian world and then my father's family, um, Christianity was highly ritualized for me. We had a certain even way that we dressed to go to church, which clothing and things like that can be a big part of ritual. So I
Yeah.
think that's really interesting, but it just wasn't called that. And so to me, ritual is about looking at um, these things that we do and bringing more intention to them, if you will. One of my teachers calls ceremony a statement of intent and a charged field.
Hmm.
And um, I think that for me, I like to look to other species sometimes to get a clearer picture of what ritual is. Do you ever watch like nature shows or anything like that?
A little bit, yeah.
I'm kind of obsessed with them when I'm not actually um, out of my house, and because I like to learn things. And one of the things that comes up for me right now is the rituals in birds. Like they have such profound rituals that they have places that they'll meet, different dances. They have ritual, like the male species will usually have ritual dances where they puff feathers and different things like that, in order to like do a communicative gesture. I'm ready to mate. I'm elephants, their death rituals that they have. We're grieving, we've lost someone. So it's this communicative gesture that's happening. And yeah, like even this, I kind of looked at it a bit as a ritual.
Hmm. You mean this conversation? Yeah, yeah, definitely. And something that's coming up for me around how conversations are ritual spaces as well is how, as a podcast creator, a part of me always feels a little bit self-conscious in creating too much of a structure around conversations because I recognize that the best conversations happen outside of structures, right? And also at the same time, through practice, I realize that when I ask different people the same question, I get really different answers. And there's something about the act of allowing these recorded conversations to have structure, to have a place where they live is so interesting. And it's like so interesting to see what then emerges out of container.
Yeah, it makes me think of that definition that I've been really like, I haven't even digested the full definition of what Teeny said ceremony is like within a charged field. And it's like, that's what you're doing. And I can even feel it for me as a participant, that I can feel the charged field. I'm saying things I wouldn't normally say if we were having a quote unquote normal conversation. So I see a lot of value in the structure. And something else that I wanted to add to the conversation about ritual is that it is a little kind of amorphous to me because it's both action and it's an idea.
Mm.
Ritual, and this is something I was talking and thinking about yesterday, ritual has been historically a really potent vehicle of social control. And so it's interesting, and it kind of why I like to play with some taboo topics, and then turn them on their heads and help people find their own definition. I'm not coming in with a strong definition of this is what ritual is for anybody who comes into my field. Um, but let's know the history of human ritual, and also the potency and how it's also played an integral role in our evolution as a species, because it's not just social control, it can also help a group of peoples identify values, commonalities, develop harmony, create from that place. Our whole
Yeah.
Something I think about a lot is, the first people who used tools in certain ways, even sticks or something to create a fire. Like that was creativity. Something that we in modernity find so incredibly mundane was a massive, amazing, like creative act that changed our evolution as a species.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm getting heated now.
Wow. I love that. I really love that idea of finding creativity in the ways that we use different tools every day. It makes me think of even, in the perhaps non-preferred world for some of us of technology, how this idea of creating different apps, is a very intelligent way of bridging that gap between innate creativity and ritual.
Mm.
What comes up for me is I had been thinking about this idea. I'm sure this app exists out there, but I just haven't found a great one, which is, an app where you can find a bathroom to use in New York City, because it's a real problem, of like walking around and not being able to find bathrooms. And especially after the pandemic, not that the pandemic is over, but since that particular world is introduced to us, a lot of places have closed down, and landscapes have really changed. And and I'm curious to see, little things like that being resurrected, you know like what does it mean now for us to create um apps that help people navigate this new landscape?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be bathrooms, it can be some other things as well, but putting it in a format that is accessible. And what is more ritualistic than picking up our phones, right? For us living in 2022.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's an extension of some of us. And, as like, the relationship between me and social media is quite interesting. I was actually reflecting on it. I made my first website. I'm dating myself right now. Zanga. I had a Zanga. And I did like, code and like, edited it and stuff and made it uniquely mine when I was 13. Like, it's not this kind of like foreign landscape for me. And I went through some really massive chronic health issues in 2020. And and it was a lifeline for me. It was a lifeline socially when I like physically could not leave my house. I felt so terrible. It made contact accessible. And I still have relationships from that time that I really, really cherish. So I'm not the personally, for me to bedevil some of the products of modernity. Do I think yeah, I have a lot of criticisms, but there's also some real I've felt benefit in my own life, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about this upcoming course for you. um i I didn't even realize when I revisited your course page, you had uploaded a video.
Mm-hmm.
um and it was such a beautiful video. I'm gonna have the link in the show notes so everyone can check it out. But I want to hear more about um what this course means to you. First of all, like maybe let's talk about this word catabasis.
Yes.
Where did that come from, and what does that mean for you? Mm,
So, a couple answers to that. Um, I I had wanted to do something. I was chronically ill from running groups in these trauma and addiction treatment centers. Like literally it was making me physically, emotionally, all kinds of things were happening for me and I was like, "Oh, I have to get out." I'm never the type to make a quick move. I want to make sure that it's deeply rooted. And I know why.
mm,
Because I what I am is a point of view. I want to be really clear about why I'm creating something and not just putting it out because I need to make money or something. And so I waited and I was like, why am I going through this again? I felt like I was in the underworld again. I went in my 20s and here I am turning 30 and I was in a car wreck and I could barely move and I was in pain in all the ways. And so I heard the word catabasis one time. I was outside and I was like, catabasis. I was like, what is that? That's weird. And I looked it up and I have had a very close relationship with the deity Hecate. She's best known for her prevalence in Greek mythology. However, she has had many names. She's like a goddess with many, many names all over Turkey, all over the Middle East. They still have temples to her in Turkey that still exist. So she is far beyond Greek mythology, in my opinion, and my research. And so, this myth came up for me of when Persephone was pulled to the underworld and ate the pomegranate seed, she was the one standing at the gates to hell. And so she was the one that could tell Demeter, I actually know where your daughter is. And Hecate is the guardian of the crossroads. She takes people from this world to the other. And
mm,
growing up Christian, I was very scared of the underworld. But it's just another world, just like this one. And um, and so I became inspired by that. I was like, there's this deity I've been working with for a very, very long time, and perhaps I could be a similar guide to that which we have been taught by modernity to fear. Yet my guess is no matter where we're from, our ancestors worked with darker, deeper energies. So there's so much potent information to be reclaimed there. And this is not a group that's based in one kind of mythological point of view. This is mine. We get to come from all different types of ancestries, all different parts of the world. And it's going to be a container where we get to be held as we find our way and our own meaning of what this is. And yeah, so that's a bit about the word. So, catabasis is a journey to the underworld. There's the hero's journey, which is like, yes, I succeed, and now I bring it back to my life. This is, I don't want to be binary here because I'm not into that, but for simplicity's sake, it's the opposite. We're going down into the underworld and emerging in spring to bring this wisdom that we found in the depths into our lives, into our leadership, in whatever we do. Whether you're a teacher, whether you sell homes, like we have the ability. We don't have to be quote unquote healers or coaches or something to make an impact in our ritual relationships, wherever we are. So it is a leadership program of sorts.
mhm. I would love to hear you talk more about what that means to you. leadership program. That
Mm.
feels, you know, something that was coming up for me as I was hearing that was um, Hecate and this really interesting triangle, right, between Hecate, Demeter, and Persephone, and
Mhm.
how they all embody different stages of going down into the underworld. Like there is the grieving process that Demeter is embodying within that mythology, right? There is perhaps the confused, the unnamed Persephone. Like in a lot of the different myths, Persephone was literally just referred to as Kore, which is the girl, right? Just the maiden. And then there's Hecate, which is this psychopomp, this person who is able to kind of be, you know, in different places and facilitating different kinds of passage way. And how, yeah, the idea of leadership to me has been sold as maybe just one version of that. And that's kind of what's coming up for me as I hear you say the words that this is a leadership program.
Right, right. Absolutely. Um, I do reference a lot in my work what I don't want. I've learned a lot of what I don't want to be, what
Mm,
I observed happen, especially in these centers where you are given a diagnosis, you are told that if you're going to succeed, you're going to do it this way. And, you know, I didn't see a lot of success. In fact, I saw a lot of death. And I think because of that, I I call it a leadership program because there can be a tendency when you're coming into someone's space to almost give your power over to this person as a teacher, as a leader. And so from the gate, I want to establish that, as Anne says, I don't want you to come to my house. Like, I don't want you to make a home in my house. I want you to find your own. I want you to build your own. And so leadership doesn't mean we're going to like change our entire lives and start leading, in this like uh, above everyone else way. It's more, uh, it's more subtle than that to me. I guess is what I'm saying. It's feeling a part of your life, feeling your inherent contribution and extraction from all of life, and being able to be with those places, I guess.
yeah. I'm hearing this thread around claiming ownership and
Mm-hmm.
claiming space. Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because in recent years, I feel like there has been a lot of conversation around facilitators kind of decentering themselves. And I think there's something really beautiful about that. And also, when you just kind of take that idea and run with it in your own lives, this idea of decentering feels really weird to me because how can you really take ownership of your role within the ecosystem if you are consistently focused on decentering yourself, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. That does make sense to me. And it's something to chew on for sure. For me, I guess because of radical aliveness already having a framework where we utilize ourselves as self as instrument, right? So I'm an instrument with a frame, and I'm always coming into every space equipped within my own lineage, this concept of non-expert model. That
Mm,
languaging for me sits in my system a lot better. Although I am leading, I need to acknowledge my power here as a leader,
yeah.
right? That's right use of power. I also will hold it knowing that I am not an expert of you. You contain multitudes, universes inside of universes. How could I know everything and put a label to your symptoms and say that thing in your chest is this? And it came from your mom, which I've seen happen all all over, you know. So to me, it's about wielding this power that I know I have, and I'm willing to stand in my wisdom. It's not
Mhm.
negating those things. It's just learning to be in relationship with it, and I guess use it wisely and being open to feedback. That's also about me as a leader, creating safety within my containers where you can bring conflict to me. If
Yeah.
I say something, if we're doing something and it doesn't feel right, let's go there. That's leadership. Learning to be in your authority to authority.
Mm. Yeah. Is there a reason why you feel like a journey to the underworld is exciting or timely in this moment in time?
Yeah, I do. I do. I I'm trying to figure out the way to say this without throwing shade. It's not my intention, but a lot of the rhetoric is soft and sweet and nice and pleasant and pleasurable. I do believe that's part of the equation, but there's also nitty gritty, deep and dirty, you know? And for me, it's about being with that full range. The modern human, because of marketing, we tend to really see happiness and joyfulness as the goal. And so, in a way, it's also my little activism bit against that kind of materialist concept that says that I need to do the somatic exercise so I feel better.
Mm.
Why? What if we learn to dance there and create from that place? It's such a place with so much wisdom. And the reality, too, is that people are not well. A lot of
Yeah.
people are not well. And going into those places as leaders helps us also support our communities there and other people there. So it echoes out without us having to try in this way. And it helps, at least for me, build my tolerance to being with what is actually happening in the world rather than having to turn away from it.
Mhm. I love that. I'm curious if you feel like sharing a little bit about the structure of catabasis.
Yeah.
Because when I first heard it, I was like, this is such a delicious structure. Take me there.
Yes, yes. So, we're going to be passing through 7 different gates. I don't have the gates on me right now, but there's connection to land is the first gate. The second one is ancestral gate and myth. We'll be doing a lot of research about our own ancestral myths, right? And embodiment practices, ritual, things like that. It's really potent to be able to do that kind of work and then have a space to come back and process what you find and be with it. So, going through these 7 gates, emerging in spring, on spring equinox, into the topside world and connecting to the world soul. And how we're going to get there is each month, the first week of the month, we're going to have a ritual. And the second week of the month, we're going to be releasing, I'll be releasing some kind of content, food for thought. I have different things planned. And then the third week of the month, we're going to have a radical aliveness process session, which a lot of the things we were just saying, right? Being with conflict, being with what is really present, not just individually, but also if there's systemic things happening in the world, we're going to be with that in community.
Mm.
Learn some skill there, learn some embodied skill around relational concepts. That's really what radical aliveness is. It's not all about feeling good or making the group happy and peaceful. And then the fourth week of the month is integration. I think this is really important because that's part of why I decided to do a longer journey is I want the integration to happen in our group field rather than, oh my God, I go into this deep experience and now I need to integrate for like 4 freaking months by myself. So that's really kind of where I feel, at least, that a lot of the deepening will happen is in that week of seeming nothingness on the surface, is probably when the deepest kind of, cauldron bubbles will be kind of well percolating. And so we'll kind of be going through that for 6 months, that model.
Yeah. I like that idea of integration because the image that's coming up for me is like a frog burping, you know? It's like there's something in that act of allowing digestion to happen that feels so exciting, and I have taken so many courses in my adult life where it's almost like to me it almost perpetuates this myth that is imparted to us by educational systems where essentially the process of learning, the learning model that we are given is like read everything from the textbook, apply it in some sort of way, or regurgitate it in an exam, and then you pass, right? When actually, that to me is only maybe even less than half the battle. Like the real work begins in trying to figure out how to have a relationship with this body of knowledge.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And this is really, it's going to be whatever it needs to be. I have a structure in my head, but ultimately the bodies that show up are really going to inform it. And I'm not just this kind of like leader with my own ideals. Like we're going to be in this together. So that for me feels exciting, and I wanted it also because it is an underworld winter journey to not be the most taxing in terms of time. That's why I decided 2 meetings a month as opposed to like every week we're going to meet and it's going to be this super quick and fast and thing, is because this is also a time for slowing and deepening. And I'm excited to see where it's going to take us because so much of my own magical practice, of course, I have some traditional training and information, and it's informed by my ancestry, but is my art practice. So who is coming so far are people who really are in alignment with this conversation about um, art being innate, somatics being innate, um, art also being a magical practice, a creative practice. So it feels exciting to me.
Yeah, I can't wait. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of ancestry that you've brought up a number of times. Um, I'm curious to hear you riff or muse or ponder about this idea of why it's important for us to um, be in relationship with our ancestors, however you define the word,
Mm.
and more specifically, connecting that to our spiritual lives.
Yeah. For me, it's felt appropriate up until now to have uh, certain spiritual practices that are in my ancestry. Of course, I'm living in San Diego, California, where, every botanical I go to is Santeria. So that also like is in my practice. Lots of candle magic, votive candles, that kind of thing. So by no means am I saying like, oh, only operate within your lineage because, in a way, we are all humans. It's
Mm,
about the reverence and respect and the way that I engage with those practices. I'm not going out and saying, "Oh, now I'm doing Santeria," right? That would be just not something that would feel resonant for my system.
Yeah.
But to me, ancestors are already kind of present in my lived experience. They inform how I inhabit my body, my grandmother, my great grandmother's experiences. I'm not I am going to admit I'm shifting a little bit of my cosmology around it because I also don't want to let that my ancestors who may or may not be well have free reign in my system.
Mm.
So there is an element of boundaries here that I didn't used to have that is starting to develop for me in this new and exciting way where I am also realizing I honor my ancestors, but also my life is mine.
Yeah.
So ancestor reverence is a very big concept to me, but also something that you and I have talked about. I also see this pine tree outside of my house. It existed long before I was on this planet, and I consider it my ancestor. This land is an ancestor. Technically, my home was built before me. My home is an entity that I am in deep and intimate communion and relationship with. So I do have a broader perspective rather than just this humanistic view of ancestor because that's how I hold everything anyway.
Yeah. I love that. I feel your Aquarius rising kind of coming up in that beautiful reflection because Aquarius is a sign that is traditionally ruled by Saturn. And as we know, Saturn speaks to tradition, Saturn speaks to that which comes before us. And also, Saturn rules both Capricorn and Aquarius, right? And to me, the Capricorn phase of Saturn is focused on really learning this idea of what tradition means and
Mm.
really maybe even applying one's own life into this framework of that which came before us, right? But the Saturn in Aquarius is much more about how do we learn all the rules so we know which ones to break.
That is so true. I love that. Yeah, the word that was coming up for me was like, my personal practices and my personal perspective is a little more emergent. Like it's kind of it's alive, like it's an entity, and I'm really open to it shifting. I'm not uh like it's not this static kind of like set of rules like maybe I grew up with. It is this entity. I breathe life into it. It breathes life into me.
I love that. I love that so much. So, I can talk to you forever, Madison, but I want to wind us to a close. So, what are the different ways that people can find you and can work with you?
Yeah. So my Instagram is ritual_body. I have a website that's madisonnees.com. I'm sure we'll link all that. But, right now I'm really focusing on katabasis. I want to welcome the beings that feel called to this journey. It feels really, really important to me. There's already a group field that I've created that is a part of the group field that we're feeling now that I just want to acknowledge for anyone who's listening if they want to tap into that. And, I'm doing something called Flirting with the Mystery sessions, where anyone for the month of August and going into September can schedule a free 45-minute mystery session with me where we're going to go where we go just to feel each other's vibe. It's a big part of my mission, and it also helps me get really clear on what I'm doing. They've been so affirming for me. Honestly, I love doing them. So anyone listening to this, I want to invite you to schedule a session with me and let's meet and chat. Because right now, katabasis is the main way to work with me. I am also, I believe, I don't know when this is coming out, but on, I believe, the 18th, I'm having a pleasure ritual, which will be very exciting as well. And that's just for people, like kind of welcoming people into this kind of emergent ritual practice that I'm doing. And more will be revealed from there. You know, I'm in an intimate relationship with ritual body, and I feel like it's kind of telling me and informing me of what the next steps are. So I don't know beyond that. It feels kind of fucking liberating to say, honestly.
So exciting. I love it. Okay, so the last question that I always ask anyone who came onto this podcast is this phrase, healing the spirit. I'm curious what is coming up for you. What do you perceive to be the opportunities or the challenge or anything you want to speak to when I share that phrase with you?
I will just share that it feels exciting to me and it feels like an opportunity because we all have different definitions of what healing means. And I think that's important, at least for me, to get clarity. Like, what does that look like? What does that taste like? What does that smell like with all my senses to be healing? And, you know, I love also thinking about the word spirit. It's like it makes me think of the concept of kami, which is the force animating all things and running through all things, even this chair that modernity would say is, you know, benign or not living, like as a spirit. And so really I don't have a solid answer. Like for a lot of things, I have more questions and more things that I hope people would sit with and be excited by. But for me, healing my spirit looks like cooking white rice and feeding my ancestors on a Sunday, lighting a candle before I have a call, meeting with another body, pulling a rune to help give me guidance for that day, feeling free and safe enough to put on a song and move as oddly as I choose and as animalistic as I can bear. That's what healing the spirit looks like to me.
Could not end with a better answer. Thank you, Madison.
Thank you.
I really love speaking with you. All right. That is my conversation with Madison. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, that you found something helpful, insightful, nourishing from our conversation. I hope that some aha moments were made. And if you are interested in working with Madison, all of the links will be in the show notes below. I highly recommend that you check out Madison's upcoming course, Katabasis. And yeah, find a way to work with Madison because Madison is an incredible human, an incredible practitioner. I could not recommend Madison's work enough. If you found this podcast or this conversation to be nourishing, to be helpful to you in some way, I would love it if you could subscribe, rate, or review this podcast with 5 stars or whatever is the highest ranking on your podcast app. If you feel like someone else will benefit from this episode, feel free to share with them too. And yeah, until next time, I hope you take good care of yourself, and I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for listening.